Okay, hey, we're here again doing something a little bit different. We're talking about stuff that hasn't been released yet and won't be released for a little while. But recently, like early last week, uh, everyone was sort of treated to a little bit of a showcase for what's to come with Disney's new streaming service, Disney Plus, aka How to Kill Netflix in 10 days.
If I'm Netflix, I'm certainly sweating bullets right now.
I myself, I plan on keeping Netflix around just because there's enough not Disney stuff that Netflix has. It's most convenient for me right now, I think. We'll see how it pans out financially. But yeah, I don't know, man. There's enough people for whom they primarily use Netflix or their streaming services for stuff that will now be available on Disney Plus, and also just again how much money people are willing to spend, how much all of the original content is like enticing people. And that's mainly what we're going to be talking about here because we both currently have this list in front of us going over all the stuff that's going to be, released on the platform. And that includes like mountains and mountains of pre existing Disney content. But our main focus for right now is going to be Disney Plus original stuff. So they're gonna have every episode of The Simpsons. They're gonna have all the Disney movies. That's all well and good. But for now, we're talking about what's new. So I don't know if you want to start off with what stands out to you most, or how do you want to go about this?
Well, we can both just before we even get into the specifics, just talk about how we feel about Disney doing this and what this is going to do to the the culture at large, and just like how people view content, and where television is going right now, and maybe talk about things in slightly broader terms before we get into the nitty gritty of what exactly Disney Plus is offering.
True. Well, it, this is now at this point already kind of an old adage, but the streaming services are slowly turning content consumption just back into cable. And I'm not sure that anyone meant this to happen, but here we are.
Yeah, now
And
that every major studio wants to make their own Netflix, it's eventually going to turn into the same problem that you had with cable all over again.
yeah. And with Disney, I'll grant you it makes the most sense on account of just if they hadn't announced this already, this would be the kind of thing that we were talking about, like hypothetically, just because Disney now owns or already has owned so much stuff that people are eager to watch. And we would be asking, okay, why isn't this all like easily available in one place? And so this just kind of feels like a given now.
And everyone's, I mean, I myself am am a little like, I know this is going to affect Netflix pretty hard. This is going to take a big chunk out of Netflix. Um,
Yeah.
I'm going to still keep my Netflix subscription. Obviously, there's tons of shows that they have that aren't even original, that they have that are still very good and that I would watch. Um, and then when you throw their original content into the mix, even when you take away the Marvel Netflix shows, they have Stranger Things and Altered Carbon and um, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Like they've got so much stuff, um, like original content wise. It's so good that I would stay on just for that.
Yeah. Like again, I don't think there's anyone who's like eager to quote unquote ditch Netflix. But again, it all comes down to how much like disposable income people have. So, especially with I think what it's going to come down to is that if people keep two, it's going to be Disney and Netflix. Like I think when it comes down to like making the real tough choices, it's going to be between stuff like Hulu and that kind of thing. Where it's like Disney and Netflix are the big two that people know, and anything else I think is what's really gonna suffer the most. Like everyone has positioned this as kind of Disney v Netflix, when I think what's most actually likely to happen in the long run is Disney or Netflix v everyone else, and everyone else loses.
Like Hulu and Amazon Prime and
Yeah,
yeah, and DC Universe.
yeah. Yeah.
I myself am going to unsubscribe from the Disney Universe here pretty soon. Um, I was holding out just so that they could finally put out the second half of Young Justice season 3, and then I could binge that and then leave. But it's just becoming like I gotta start making cuts somewhere, and
Yeah.
haven't been super impressed with what they put out. I mean, I've seen a lot of people rave about Doom Patrol. I saw the first 3 episodes. I don't know what people are talking about. I didn't find it that compelling. I don't know, just and their comic selection is so limited. I can find their comics digitally online and like in other places and not have to pay that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame because, like you said, a lot of people have been singing Doom Patrol's praises, but so far that's really been the only thing I think to come out of the DC universe that's been like universally praised. Even Young Justice, to a degree, I've seen people complain about, like, the animation isn't as of quality as the first 2 seasons. Some of
Yeah,
the
it
writing
was
is a bit
kind of
iffy.
like
Most people are positive on that.
I was just gonna say it's kind of like the drop down in animation quality from Legend of Korra season 1 to season 2.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine that. But yeah, I feel like really DC Universe has been around for a couple of months now, and there's only the 2 shows that seem to be what anyone is talking about as like worth the price of admission. So when Disney comes along, it is like, hey, $7 a month for our entire animated catalog, our entire catalog of Marvel movies, stuff that's original, that's adjacent to those things, all of our Star Wars stuff, and so on and so forth. And like, they don't even have Marvel comics. They're not even doing what DC's doing relative to the comics, but like I've heard people suggest maybe they could do that once they've like established themselves. That might be an added feature later on. All of this stuff, I don't really see how it's competition between the two.
It's definitely not. And Marvel has Marvel Unlimited, their own digital comic subscription. I don't really see the need for them to throw that into the Disney streaming service. Like, I guess it's you might be able to grab some people who've never touched a comic before if they already have that to look at while they're in the service. But I don't know. I feel like people who read comics are people who read comics, and you're not really going to get the average Joe who's never touched a comic book in his life to suddenly pick up one at age 25 or 26.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure about that. Just because, again, part of it might be a deal of time and not exactly having ease of access to comics, not necessarily, as I think we are wont to assume, just not being interested in comics because comics are dumb.
Or comics are for kids.
Yeah.
But I really do feel, and like maybe this is just me being overtly cynical. I feel like most people in general just don't like to read. Like even take comics out of the equation, even books. Like I feel like the average layman does not like people don't read books as much as they used to. Period. Just in
That's
general.
true. That's true. But again, the slightly cynical but ultimately more, I think, sort of optimistic stance that I take is that it's all a thing of time. Like, there's so much content to consume coming from all directions, and visual mediums and like auditory stuff. Like people will listen to books before they'll read them just because it's less time consuming and it's easier to take in stuff passively, whereas reading is more of an active process.
Yeah, it's
And
something
so
you
I don't.
actually have to make an effort to do, as opposed to just like listening to an audiobook or just sitting in front of a screen and watching a movie.
Yeah, so I think it's people want to absorb as much as possible and experience as much as possible, and there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah, but that's the excuse that we make for nearly everything. Like, there's never enough time for me to do X, Y, and Z.
Pretty much. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I just feel like this is also, by the way, 420 Blaze It. But there's so much. Like, it's kind of unprecedented. I think the level of content that we're getting with Disney Plus. Just because if you told me, okay, Disney is gonna make like a streaming service for kids and families that's just all of the Disney animated canon stuff and all of the stuff that is like adjacent to that. So like all of the sort of direct to video sequels, all of the animated cartoons that came around from the 90s and are still kind of a thing,
Mhm.
like live action remakes of stuff, just like the pure what we associate with the Disney brand stuff. If you told me that by itself was getting a streaming service, I could also believe that that was going to totally dominate and people might even like jump from Netflix for just that. But then you throw on Star Wars stuff and Marvel stuff, and all of that is not just there, but also like original programming is coming. Like this is I'm this is kind of difficult for me to wrap my head around still.
Um, yeah. Another thing I was really surprised by, the price is actually pretty low.
I know, especially just for the sheer volume of stuff that's there.
Now, if they keep it at that price point, um, which I don't know, it's 50-50 whether or not they do that. Um, Netflix is almost double that at this point, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I think well the thing is Netflix used to be much lower
I
and then
know.
over time they added more. I think I'm not gonna like say like over under on this, but my personal opinion is I think it's likely we keep the circa $7 price point for a couple of months, and
Hmm.
then we raise it once enough people are like hooked. Maybe a
Yeah,
year. I don't know.
maybe. But yeah, that was something that really surprised me right out the gate. It was like what, 6.99?
It's $6.99.
Yeah, and for all that content, mind blowing. Um, yeah, so I guess we should just start talking about their shows one by one.
Yeah, let's start moving down the list. And the first thing that they've got listed, which is actually the thing that people have seen some sort of footage from, and it was floating around online. You can probably still find it. Is the Mandalorian, starting with the Star Wars stuff.
Okay, I don't know a ton about it, and I didn't see the Star Wars celebration panel. Um, like now that I am getting more and more into Star Wars, I think I will go ahead and watch that and try to look into that more. But the main thing that has me excited about this show is John Favreau's behind it.
Yeah, he's kind of the big for me as like I now after kind of not considering myself a Star Wars fan for a long time, consider myself one. And I don't know, it's just Boba Fett and his whole kind of accoutrement was never anything that appealed to me. Like I kind of missed the bandwagon as far as considering him and like Mandalorians and stuff to be super cool. And that might just be because he created an archetype kind of character of like bounty hunter kind of rogue guy who's not really aligned with anyone and is kind of a bit player that we kind of got used to over time. So I don't really see the novelty in him. But I don't know, like Jon Favreau, I trust him so much. And what I've seen of the production and like the concept art and stuff, it's like, nothing different or unique by Star Wars standards, but it looks cool. So, it'll probably be something that I at least give a couple episodes to hook me with.
And this is something that I never thought we'd get, a live-action Star Wars series. And with Disney, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's going to have a pretty solid budget behind it.
Yeah.
And it's gonna look like just as good or better as Netflix's stuff, like Altered Carbon. That show is beautiful cyberpunk, and it looks just as good or better as Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, having seen the Celebration panel footage, and even though that wasn't in the best quality, it does absolutely look, the little of it that we've seen, does absolutely look like in line with the feature films in terms of fidelity. So, yeah, we're in for like bang for our buck. They're not gonna cheap out with this one.
And the only actor I know that's going to be in it is Pedro Pascal. I know him from I think Narcos and Triple Frontier. He was also in Kingsman Golden Circle.
Yeah, they've got it listed here that he was in Game of Thrones, and I feel like that's what a lot of people know him from. So,
yeah, he's been in a lot of really good stuff. He's a really, really good actor. I'm glad he's had such an eclectic career.
Oh, and just because they're talking about it here, I guess we might as well also mention the sort of like airing schedule for these, because we're not going the Netflix route of dropping everything at once. The first episode of The Mandalorian will drop on Disney Plus launch day, but if I've heard correctly, it's going to be a weekly sort of dropping schedule.
And if that's the case, I think that is potentially really smart in setting themselves apart from Netflix, and also keeping people who are maybe on the fence, like who want to just maybe binge some stuff and then hop right off. It'll keep them on longer, and maybe they'll decide to just actually make it a regular thing like they have Netflix.
Yeah, and it'll also because I don't want to make this whole thing just comparing it to Netflix, but I do think this is worth mentioning just because we've talked our fair share about Netflix content, and I've been listening to this excellent podcast by Patrick Willems called The Infinity Pod. Check it out if you have the time. And it's nominally a podcast about Marvel movies, but really they just talk about whatever. And they brought up an excellent point regarding this kind of approach to dropping content, which is that there was a neat article by someone, I forget their name, but it was about how Game of Thrones is the last TV show that we'll all watch together, and referring to the idea that once everything is moved to streaming and everything becomes bingeable, then you kind of lose the sense of TV as any TV show as like a point of the culture where everyone is sitting down together and taking stuff in episode by episode at roughly the same time. And if this is the approach that Disney Plus regularly takes, then maybe they can avoid that kind of problem, where we talk about how great stuff like Punisher and Daredevil and Jessica Jones is, and yet maybe the fact that all of that drops at once leads to it falling out of the conversation faster.
Yeah.
Like Daredevil Season 3 came out. Yeah, like Daredevil Season 3 came out and was like what everyone was talking about, and it was like hailed as a masterpiece and like the subject of conversation for like 2 weeks. and then everyone had kind of seen it, and like the people who were gonna sit down and watched it sat down and watched like a whole 13 hours of content and talked about it all in roughly the same period of time. Whereas imagine if Daredevil season 3, being as good as it was released episode by episode, we would probably still be talking about it now because we'd have a solid stretch of a couple of months, 3 or 4 months of, okay, this episode was amazing. I can't wait until the next one. Oh, that episode was amazing too. Oh, great. Instead of, yeah, like the 13-hour movie approach, as people like to put it, might have ultimately proved to be to the detriment of Netflix content. Because a 13-hour movie, people will talk about for a couple of weeks and then move on to the next one.
Maybe
Whereas
not. I think it's all in
13 weeks of television, that it feels like, will... Oh, sorry, what'd you say?
I was just gonna say that I think that's up to the consumer, right? I mean, sure, we're going to make time to see a show like that we're interested in, like as a 13-hour movie, but I don't think the average layman has time to sit down and watch that much content.
Yet, the argument against that is something like Game of Thrones, or something like that, where it's like, yeah, maybe not everyone sits down and watches it just because it's not their thing, or they're busy, but with shows like that, we do have a precedent for like mainstream television shows that release weekly, and which the culture collectively decides, okay, this is cool. This is like the kind of thing that I'm going to talk about with my friends around the water cooler the next day. And to have, like, nothing guarantees that that's going to happen with something like The Mandalorian or whatever other shows that they have. But if it does, if people latch on to a show and decide it's that good, then having that sort of space between episodes is going to create more time in which people are like, oh, hey, The Mandalorian, it's really good. Let's talk about this week's episode, as opposed to let's talk about the whole show in one sitting, and then we're kind of done with it.
Yeah, that's true. Game of Thrones is that one big show that I can think of, and Walking Dead used to be that show before they got way too repetitive and started padding the episodes out with the most obnoxious and insanely boring filler. But I remember, like, this was back around when I was still in middle school, high school. I remember when that show was considered just as popular and by some just as good quality-wise as Game of Thrones. And it was something I always heard people talking about. It was always in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, and it's like, it doesn't even necessarily need to be the big epic action shows. Like, that might be the main one that gets the attention, but it's like, I feel like the point that article is making is that the reason that it feels like Game of Thrones is all that's left as far as that goes is because so many other content that proves to be that good or that eye-catching is getting released in bulk. Whereas rewind a couple of years, and of course, like, it would change with demographics, but you would have those kind of weekly conversations or that kind of regularly consistent attention to a show with, say, like The Office or How I Met Your Mother as far as comedy goes, or with like, what was the other one? I just had it in mind, and it was something that ended a while ago. Ah, man.
Arrow
I should have, I forget
me.
what... Arrow's a good example. The Flash. People still have that with The Flash. It's to a lesser extent, granted, but with the Arrowverse in general, you still have a very dedicated group of fans who are keeping these shows in the public consciousness, not just for a couple of months at a time, but week after week after week. And that's really to that show's benefit, or those shows.
So yeah, I think like by them doing the whole weekly model, it could get them just as much, if not more, limelight in terms of Netflix's strategy. And I appreciate Netflix's strategy just because um, I don't have to wait if I'm really enjoying it, and I can just keep watching it.
Yeah.
And I am someone who likes to rewatch shows that I like constantly. Um, I've rewatched the first two seasons of Arrow. Well, I make it a ritual. I rewatch the first two seasons of Arrow every year. Um, I've rewatched the originals a lot. Like I go back to shows that I've enjoyed quite a bit. Like I make time to do that. So I do very much appreciate what Netflix is doing. Um, but I do think it is a good way uh, to get like buzz for your shows if you're knocking them out weekly as opposed to throwing it all at once because um, maybe people who really like it they will they have incentive to keep talking about it because they don't have the whole thing at their fingertips and they want more.
Right. Lost was what I was gonna mention. Like stuff like Lost, and even keeping on the DC sort of track, Smallville. Like stuff that's kind of got the public attention like that. Yeah, and like you said, there is merit to releasing everything in bulk. There's kind of pros and cons to both of these, right?
Yeah,
Like if you release everything in bulk, then the people who really like it, then that's gratifying for the individual consumer because they don't then have to like wait for more stuff. They can just go through it at their own pace. And if they don't want to watch it all in one sitting, then fine, they can watch a couple episodes and then one episode later and then a couple episodes later. They can really they have as much control as possible over the rate at which they get the story. Whereas, again, like we've been saying, if you dole it out, then that might be less gratifying for the consumer, but it keeps the brand and it keeps the show itself in
in the conversation.
conversation for long.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so, just moving on from that and going to the next sort of big Star Wars series that's been confirmed is something that a lot of people, including myself, have kind of been questioning. Why are we doing this? Which is a series about Cassian Andor. So, like, Diego Luna is reprising his role for that one, and Alan Tudyk is going to be involved as K2SO. And I'm kind of not sure why this is happening. It took me a while, months and months and months back when it was announced, to even accept that it was real. Just because I'm like, well, what story is there to tell with these guys? I'm really confused.
and it's going to take place prior to Rogue One,
It
which
is.
I felt was. I mean, I was pretty indifferent towards Rogue One. I don't feel like that movie needs to exist. I mean, the most enjoyment I got out of that movie was the Darth Vader scene. That was about it. Like, I'm not gonna call it a bad movie, but I was pretty indifferent towards it.
I'm a bit more positive. I I don't. I also agree that it didn't necessarily need to exist, but then I would argue not really anything quote unquote needs to exist. But it's not something I feel compelled to rewatch very often. I've maybe seen it 3 or 4 times after seeing it in theaters, and yet whenever I do rewatch it, I always enjoy it. And it's one of those movies that I'm always kind of worried about, like, okay, is this going to be the time that I sit down with it and don't like it as much? And that doesn't really happen. But again, it's a matter of, like, I like Diego Luna's performance as that character. I think that is definitely a character who exists and was written to be a figure in that film. I don't know if he can carry a TV series, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to say about that. I think the next one we have is Obi-Wan Kenobi, a mini series.
Which which I believe is still a rumor. Yeah, then they're citing Star Wars Newsnet, saying that the miniseries is a top priority, but that's really the only source as far as this thing even being real or even existing. Given the way that Solo kind of underperformed, and the way that they've mentioned that they're cutting back on theatrical releases, assuming that they were really attached to doing an Obi-Wan story of any kind, it only makes sense that this is where that would end up. But I don't know. I feel like it's 50-50 on whether or not that even happens.
Um, yeah, that's something that I hate to keep going back to that, but I don't know if I need that either. I am very excited about them bringing back the Clone Wars series. The seventh season
Yep.
is currently in production, and like I've said many times before, that is where my true like love and appreciation of Star Wars begins and ends. Like I really enjoyed Force Awakens, and I am one of the people that liked Last Jedi. Um, Despite the issues that I have with it, I do like that movie overall. Um, there's just a lot I don't like, but I can kind of take or leave any of those movies, to be honest. Like even the original trilogy, like um, I rewatched those in preparation for Force Awakens right before it came out, and even Empire Strikes Back, which everyone heralds as a masterpiece, that was kind of hard for me to get through. Um,
Uh, I'm kind of in the boat, kind of, just in that I adore Last Jedi. Like with every fiber of my being, I really enjoy Force Awakens. The original trilogy, I've kind of always appreciated them more than I did like sitting down watching them. That's kind of changed over time, and I go back to them. Like, again, those are movies where I don't feel compelled to go back to them all that often, but when I do, when I sit down with them, I always have a good time. I kind of feel like I respect them more than I do really like love them as viewing experiences. Whereas with Last Jedi, it's just that's the movie where it's like, okay, I can call myself a Star Wars fan because I unequivocally love this. Whereas the wider sort of sphere of, I guess you could call it, expanded Star Wars content doesn't really grab me all that much. Like, again, I'll watch The Mandalorian because of Favreau. And the Cassian Andor series, I guess I'm just curious as to what that even is. So I'll give that a couple episodes. But Star Wars, just like the grander universe of Star Wars, I'm not necessarily like invested in that. And so I guess the idea with these shows might be to then make people like us invested in that and make the kind of laymen who are already going to be buying Disney Plus and be like, hey, here's a thing to dip your toes into wider Star Wars canon and see if it's for you.
yeah, I was indifferent towards the prequels too. Well, actually, I I almost flat out didn't like the original trilogy much at all. To be honest with you, like I do appreciate them in the sense that they've done a lot for pop culture, and they do have a really dedicated and passionate fan base. But like just watching those movies, it feels like a chore every single time. And but Clone Wars though, I was really invested in Clone Wars, and I liked um, how at first it kind of started off as an episodic, just go on random like universe trotty type of adventures, and then the plot starts to get more involved and all that. And I felt like Clone Wars was just amazing. Like, and I haven't gone back to Clone Wars as much as I'd like to. I'd like to do that if it is still on Netflix, but I think Clone Wars is a really, really good series, and I'm glad they're finally giving it another season.
Right. So hang on, they're saying there's a couple of other rumored Star Wars series. I don't really give these much credence, but just to list them off for the sake of being thorough, they've mentioned a Lando series, Kira, the female lead from Solo, getting a series, Finn and Poe Dameron getting a series. I don't really believe that that's happening, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't be shocked if they ended up being real, but this is the first time hearing of them. I don't think they're all that likely.
I don't either. Let's hop to the big one, Marvel.
Well, I mean, actually, I don't know. Yeah, let's because Marvel is the next biggest one. We'll tackle the smaller stuff as like footnotes. So, a lot of Marvel's coming. They're bringing all of the MCU movies, including Captain Marvel. Here on the list, looking at it right now, something that interests me is Marvel 616, which is a series of sort of small documentaries exploring different aspects of like the Marvel brand, stories, characters, like really well-known creators, and all that sort of thing. And that is not something that I saw coming, but that sounds really, really intriguing to me. And I'm probably going to jump right into that once I have the chance.
Oh yeah, I eat up behind the scenes stuff with a spoon. Like ever since 2007 when I saw the behind the scenes for the first Michael Bay Transformers film, I've been obsessed with behind the scenes and commentaries and like how movies are made, and I love that stuff, and I love Marvel. So seeing any kind of behind the scenes stuff they can offer is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, and again, this is, like we've been saying, a really great opportunity to bring laymen into. Oh, so you cut off for a minute. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and like we've been saying, I think this is a great opportunity to bring laymen into maybe reading comics, or maybe sort of having a greater appreciation for connections between the comics and the movies, or comics and animated series, where it's like, here we'll have an episode that's like a short documentary about this comic arc, or this specific artist, or this writer, or this character history. And then, I don't know, that's a great, I think, easy, digestible way to get someone who maybe didn't pay much mind to comics to be like, okay, maybe there's something here for me. Like, I thought this episode documentary was pretty cool. Maybe I'll go seek out this arc, or I'll go seek out this run, and it'll be really nice. So yeah, that's just a really smart, I think, kind of integration brand sort of thing. And I'm just really interested to see like what artists and what creators and what characters they end up picking and how deep they go into it. That's going to be really fun.
And we know the Russos are directing a documentary specifically for Stan Lee.
Yes, and that's going to make all of us cry like babies. So can't wait for that to happen.
And like one of my biggest regrets is that I guess not really a regret because I never had the chance, but I just really wish I had the chance to meet the man before he passed.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have that kind of feeling. But on a more triumphant note, we also have the now five confirmed series taking place within the MCU. We've got Loki, Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch and Vision with the most amazing title ever, and Falcon and Winter Soldier. And so I'm just kind of looking forward to all of those in equal measure. WandaVision, mainly because it's called WandaVision, and I can't wait to see what that's like. And yeah, I don't know what sticks out to you most amongst those.
Well, interestingly enough, they all stick out to me for very different reasons. Hawkeye sticks out to me because he's a fan favorite. I love Hawkeye. He's one of my favorites as well. And they did finally give him a lot of play in Ultron. And he has some great moments in Civil War. But I always wanted more. Like I've never been like fully satisfied, and you really never can be with an ensemble type thing. With all the movies he's been in, they've all been ensembles. And even though like I don't know, maybe Winter Soldier might have ended up being a very different movie, or maybe he just would have added a half hour to the movie. But I felt like he should have been a Winter Soldier. But regardless, maybe, yeah. Like I don't know, maybe. Like I don't know, and we don't get an explanation for why he's not in that film, but um, like an actual story explanation as to why he's not in that film. But I am very excited to see like him get his own series because um, I do think he deserves one since he's always just been thrown in an ensemble cast movie, and we never really gotten to spend as much time with him as I would like.
Yeah, this feels. For, I feel like we've gotten enough of all of these characters to be invested, but given that these are like the ones who don't get a lot of time to themselves or a lot of time to shine in the movies, it really makes sense that these would all be the picks for ones who would get their own series. Aside from maybe Loki, just because it feels like Loki is a major highlight for almost everyone in any movie where he shows up and he gets a lot of focus. So I'm kind of shocked that he is in this kind of crop of characters getting this kind of series. But if they've got interesting stuff they want to do with him, then I'm down. I just really hope that it takes place before Infinity War because honestly, all of these other characters, I'll be fine. Vision, whatever. I'll be fine if WandaVision takes place after Infinity War. Loki is the one character out of this group where I'm like, no, he's gotta still be dead. He's gotta be dead.
And I have no doubts that they will keep him dead. I really don't. I think this series that they're doing definitely takes place before Infinity War. Might even take place before we see him in the first Thor film. We could just be following him being mischievous before he even like clashes with Thor and tries to take over Asgard and then tries to take over the world. Like
Yeah.
I really think this Loki series is a prequel series, and that we're not going to be dealing with him like, oh, I just survived. I'm getting my neck broken by Thanos, and whoa, whoop de doo. Like I really don't think Marvel is ignorant enough to do that, especially with
Yeah.
all the death fake outs they've already thrown at us. Um,
Yeah.
so like actually, even though like there's no doubt in my mind that Loki series is a prequel series, I'm still not. That's the one that I'm actually not really excited for at all. Like I like Loki. I understand why he's a fan favorite and why everyone loves that character. I would be fine if we just let him like fully die after Infinity War. Like we don't bring him back in any kind of capacity. He's just dead, and we never see that character again. Um, but with Falcon and Winter Soldier, a lot of people joked, myself included, after seeing them in Civil War, that those two should get a show. I think Marvel was thinking that themselves as they were watching those scenes with them together, and just thinking, what if we actually did something with them? There might actually be something there.
Yeah. And like especially because Falcon, again, like Wanda, Vision, Hawkeye, Falcon, I feel like I've gotten enough of those characters to care about them. I don't know what it is with Bucky. Is it just that so much of his time is spent either brainwashed or recovering from brainwashing? I feel like his first appearance in Captain America the First Avenger, which is now almost a decade old, I feel like that was the last time he was an actual character. And so it'll be good to see him in a whole television series where he's a co-lead to actually have him feel like a person again and not just a story device for Steve.
Yeah, that'll be nice. I wish somehow that Marvel had known how integral he was going to be later, so that they could spend more time fleshing him out and give. They should have given him more scenes in First Avenger, because a lot of people forgot he was even in that movie by the time we got to Winter Soldier.
True, but part of me wants, like, part of it is them forgetting him specifically, and how much is it? How much was it just people at the time not going back to that movie?
Fair enough. And yeah, I don't think he's like barely in the movie. He shares like solid screen time with Steve, but I don't know. I feel like he should have been in that movie a little more. Still, maybe that's just me.
I mean, I don't argue that point, but I feel like for what he is in there, he's a memorable enough presence. He has some good lines. He's like the focus of a whole like sequence of the plot is getting him back amongst others.
And that might
But
be my biggest criticism out of any of the characters we're giving shows to is that um, Bucky, because of what we've chosen to do with him, story-wise and the mind control and all that, he's not really the character. Like I couldn't really describe who Bucky is as a character to you.
and that would be what point of giving him this show is, in
Exactly.
fairness, is to rediscover that.
Yeah, so that we can finally get that and flesh him out. Now, a lot of people, like especially people who aren't big comic fans and don't know about Wanda and Vision's history in the comics, they think that their relationship in Infinity War kind of comes out of nowhere.
I don't actually hear that complaint all that often. I don't hear
I
it as often as I do hear like
I heard it a fair amount
Black
when
Widow and Hulk
the movie
coming out
first
of
came
nowhere,
out.
and
I mean, yeah, it wasn't as big of a problem as Widow and Hulk in Ultron, but I definitely heard a lot
well,
of people talking about that when Infinity War first came out. That
personally, I feel like both of those relationships were set up fine, and people are exaggerating in both cases. But yeah, it's good to have this for the people who are like, even if it's not a matter of the relationship came out of nowhere, because I know some people who are like, it's not that it came out of nowhere, it's that we could have used more time if we were being asked to care about it as much as we were. And like, it works fine for a lot of people, including us, but there's some people who are like, oh, okay, I accept that they have feelings for each other, that's not an issue. But to rest so much of the movie's emotional stakes on that relationship, it could have used more uh, sort of like setup going into the film. I didn't necessarily feel that way for that, but for the people who did, it'll be nice to, even if this is set after Endgame, just to kind of sit with the two of them for a while and sort of explore what their dynamic is on a deeper level.
yeah, and these movies, oftentimes, they don't take place right after the other. There are a number of years in between with a lot of these films. So I think the idea is, by and large, they take place in real time. So like you have a good 2 years, well, actually no, 3 years after Ultron, and 2 years after Civil War. So I mean, them being together for a while, that didn't strike me as something that we needed to spend screen time on, given like how much time has passed in between. But it's certainly understandable.
Yeah, and that's sort of the same argument I make Black Widow and Hulk, but like I don't want to get into reviewing these movies because we've already spent like a lot of time on this and there's more to talk about, so we're gonna move on real fast. But yeah, I'm looking forward to each and every one of these shows, knowing that they're all of the actors are coming back, that they're gonna have basically movie budgets again, like we said for The Mandalorian. It's really exciting. It's kind of like I feel like at this point, again, going back to the Marvel Netflix stuff, the bloom has definitely faded off of the roses of that kind of continuity, or that sort of like what's the word, like a corner of the universe.
Hmm.
And I feel like we might be able to avoid that going forward if we don't feel quite as constrained as we do budgetarily. Maybe it'll feel more like continuations of movies as opposed to, in the cases of stuff like Iron Fist and on occasion Luke Cage, kind of like tiptoeing around comic book stuff because we're not confident enough to really make it work. There's no excuse now to be like, just do the outrageous stuff.
Well, I don't think that's wholly fair, just because those shows are like about very different characters and are going for a very, very different tone. Um, like, yeah, I will agree that Iron Fist just doesn't even know what the heck it is, and and, and Luke Cage is a little meandery, um, but like Daredevil is fully. I mean, until we get to the Hand, they're fully confident in everything they're doing.
Yeah, that's mainly why I stick with Luke Cage and Iron Fist as the example. You could also argue Defenders in season 2 of Jessica Jones. It just feels like, with the exclusion of most of Daredevil, I feel like maybe there's an argument to be made for budget being a factor in, like, okay, why aren't we just doing this stuff with more confidence?
Well, I mean, they don't. Those aren't characters that you necessarily need a bigger budget for. I don't think budget is that big of the issue. Like with the quality of those shows, or like why they're not as comic booky, or like feel like they're not as confident as they should be. I feel like it's more of a creativity and writing issue. That's a lot of what I feel when I look at it. It's just we're afraid of this material and we don't know what the heck to do with it. Like Iron Fist should have been
true. Again, this is just me. Sorry, this is mostly me speculating, and I don't want to like pretend like I know what happens behind the scenes on those shows, but I'm just suggesting that the lack of creativity or the lack of sort of knowing what to do or the sort of fear of the material might be coming from a place of, okay, we're a really small budget television show. I don't know if I have like the room to do the cool stuff that maybe I would do otherwise. Then again, Scott Buck was in charge of season 1 of Iron Fist, and we have reason to believe that that's not really a problem, and it really is just him.
And like I was saying, like once we finally got the first season of that show, there should have been it should have been a modern day Badlands show where you do some super crazy.
Right.
Oh, it should have been an over the top, heightened kung fu show that is like having fun with itself and is like making an effort to get you invested in the characters, and like the plot doesn't have to be like super enthralling or anything, but just make you care about what's going on and the characters, and you got a solid show.
And so, some other stuff to do before we move on from Marvel is we've got some cool animated stuff coming down the pipeline.
Before we move off,
what it's not listed here, but
hey Nick, before we move off of Marvel, I do want to talk really quickly about that that What If series that they're doing.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. An animated sort of What If series building off of the MCU. I believe they're all building off the MCU. And we have the premise for the first episode, which is Peggy Carter, Captain America. So that's best foot forward, I guess. I'm really looking forward to seeing what else we do with these. Like, there's such a rich sort of space to work with, even if they're limiting themselves to just the movies.
Yeah,
there's
like
so many.
What if Iron Man like never got captured and taken to the cave? What if it wasn't even him that stopped the Chitauri invasion with the missile? What if it was stopped some other way? Does Tony take a completely different character track since he doesn't have that trauma of going up into the wormhole?
What if no one stops that nuke? What if Manhattan gets nuked and the Avengers are dead?
Yeah, what happened if they lose in the first Avengers film?
What if the other half of the cast is the ones who get snapped at the end of Infinity War? Stuff like that. Like, there's so much stuff.
Yeah, that would be really cool. What if Cap was the Winter Soldier?
Yeah, that might even be part of the Peggy Carter thing. So yeah, there's so much stuff. There's so many different ways to see how this goes, and there's also why am I forgetting its name? The the series that Kevin Smith is going to be working on. That's another animated series, and it's going to feature Howard the Duck and a lot of other characters and sort of like a weird ensemble thing. MODOK, I believe, is part of it. That sounds really interesting and strange. Can't wait to see what that ends up being.
Yeah, so overall, I'm very excited for the new shows that Marvel's bringing to the table, and that's the main thing that's getting my subscription. I am glad that we're getting a live action Star Wars series, and even more excited about them bringing Clone Wars back and with a new season. But all of Marvel stuff is what put it over the top for me, and what's gonna definitely make me one of their customers when they launch the service.
Yeah, I'm buying for the Marvel stuff. That, like you said, that's what put it over the edge. Like Star Wars stuff, fine, interesting. Disney animated canon stuff, I adore that, and I'm definitely going to be watching that a whole bunch, but I could find other ways to watch most of that stuff. But this new Marvel sort of programming is what's really, I think, going to get a lot of people to ultimately spend the money.
So yeah. They're also putting out I think National Geographic. I was a big National Geographic and Animal Planet kid growing up,
Yeah.
so that's nice to have.
Uh, we're
And
getting we're getting oh, huh. Apparently we're getting a series set in the world of Monsters Inc.
yeah, I heard about that.
This is the first time hearing about it. That sounds really interesting. We're getting an Untitled Muppet series, which I'm really happy for just because I love the Muppets. And after Muppets Most Wanted kind of bombed a couple of years ago, I was worried. And the Muppet series that they had a couple of years ago on ABC, neither of those did very well. So I was kind of worried that Disney would just stop doing things with the property. I'm
Wasn't there
glad we're
some
getting
kind of
more Muppets.
I think there was a Muppets movie with Melissa McCarthy that was really raunchy that also didn't do very well. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, and I don't remember the name of that film, but I do remember seeing
That
trailers
was
everywhere.
you're thinking about what is it? The Happy Time Murders.
Yeah,
You're thinking of the Happy Time Murders, which isn't really connected to the Muppets. It's just one of the Hensons worked on it, and so it has that aesthetic. But it's not like it's not in any way related to Disney. It's not part of the brand. It's it's its own thing.
okay. I do remember like that being a potential issue. Like, was Disney going to sue them or not for it being so close to the Muppets?
Yeah, that was an issue, but it ended up not mattering because no one saw that movie.
Yeah, I certainly didn't see it. I kind of forgot about it.
But yeah, that's about all of interest, I think. Again, putting aside the bajillions and bajillions of pre-existing stuff that's going to be on there. So yeah, they've really we've got our work cut out for us as far as watching all this stuff. But
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
I sure am. I'm gonna have to, um, as I said, drop DC Universe here pretty soon. And I really like Amazon Prime too. Like, I don't want to rid of my Amazon Prime. I don't want to drop my Netflix. And I don't know though. Like, I feel like I need to drop one of those if like when this service hits. Just to manage my income. But man, this is tough. This is really tough for me. Like, I love both Amazon Prime and Netflix, and to throw in a new one, I mean, it is like the price is insanely good. Like, just starting out the gate, $6.99 a month.
Yeah,
But
like
yeah, I will definitely get the service.
yeah, same.
Well,
And
guys,
now wait for what? 5, 6 months 7 months?
Yep, and it'll be here. I'm assuming that Endgame will be on there too once they launch, since that'll probably already be on DVD by the time this service comes out.
Oh yeah, definitely. And speaking of Endgame, the next time that you hear from us will likely be us talking about that movie. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned and let us know what you guys are excited for in regards to this service. If you're going to get this service, how you feel about the streaming model in general, all that good stuff. Let us know. Um, you know, if you have any thoughts on our comments or if you're going to get this service yourself, feel free to let us know.